Hello, family. Welcome to another installment of our devotional series. I'm so excited to be with you again, and I'm equally excited to share our devotional thought. But before we dig in, let me share what I've been tinkering with since we last talked. Now, any proper devotional series needs a title, right? So here's what I came up with. Your Devotional Dose. What do you think? In this pandemic, so much is said about taking this supplement and that vitamin, and even more recently, a vaccination. It seemed to me that the image of us taking daily doses has become so impressed on our minds that it would be a good way to highlight the most important medicine we need to live. I know, it's a little bit cheesy, but hopefully you get the point, and you'll plan to make this series a regular part of your spiritual diet. Okay, enough of the juicy puns. Let's dig in. Last time, we spoke about abundance, not as a result of collecting a bunch of material things, but as a function of the right mindset. But there's another element to this mindset that we can't leave out. And to guide our discussion, I'd like to share from a very familiar story in Scripture. It comes out of Luke 19, verses 11 through 27. Luke is describing Jesus as he's about to teach in response to all of the buzz surrounding his kingdom. You see, Jesus was in Jerusalem, so there was a lot of chatter about whether or not he would assume his role as king at that very moment. What's pretty clear here is that they completely missed the purpose and the nature of God's kingdom. So to help them understand, Jesus uses one of his clutch teaching tools, the parable. The story tells us about a high-ranking individual who is about to basically level up and become king. Before he leaves, though, he calls together a few of his servants to give each one of them a portion of his wealth, with specific instructions for them to invest it. The thing is, this guy is not very popular, and that's putting it mildly. It's so bad that after he leaves, his very own people send a delegation behind him just to let his superiors know how much they don't want him to be king. Somehow, he becomes king anyway and makes his way back home to tend to his affairs. And his primary concern, no doubt, is how his servants fared with his wealth. The first two servants present their report and essentially double their master's money, which, needless to say, pleased the master very, very much. He even expands their responsibilities and elevates their status as a reward for their efforts. Then the third servant steps in. That's when things get really interesting. This is how the Bible describes it. Verse 20. But the third servant brought back only the original amount of money and said, "Master, I hid your money and kept it safe. I was afraid because you are a hard man to deal with, taking what isn't yours and harvesting crops you didn't plant." "You wicked servant," the king roared. "Your own words condemn you. If you knew that I'm a hard man who takes what isn't mine and harvests crops I didn't plant, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it." Let's be very clear here. This guy had one job, simply to bring back more money than he was given. That's it. But he was so consumed by his hatred for the master that it compromised his ability to meet his contractual obligation. And to make matters worse, he tried to cover it under a cloak of righteous indignation, claiming his actions were motivated by his master's poor character. And the master even calls him out on it. Because when you don't like someone, it's not enough to just not invest their money. No. You got to go as far as literally hiding their money under a mattress so it has no chance to appreciate. But all this begs the question, why would Jesus share this parable as a way to correct confusion about his kingdom? On the surface, it seems like the subject of this parable is focused on risk tolerance, positive return on investments. You almost expect a chart graphing the gains and losses of the financial markets of the day. But I think it's a safe bet that Jesus had a higher purpose for sharing this parable. You see, the buzz circulating Jesus' arrival in Jerusalem was rooted in a popular movement. Many people of that day didn't like Herod as king and wanted to see a change in the administration. But no one had any real skin in the game. For much of these speculators, Jesus was nothing more than a charismatic pawn for their selfish political aspirations. And you know Jesus wasn't having any of that. He wanted his audience to understand that to be a part of his kingdom, one had to be willing to take a personal risk, particularly when its leader was not popular, when the crowds were gone, and the Instagram page wasn't popping. But that's not all. For Jesus, investing in God's kingdom was expressed by one's willingness to take the lemons he'd given them and make lemonade. It wasn't about some specific arbitrary amount. You may have realized that each of the first two servants returned different amounts relative to their investments. That's because the goal was maximizing whatever you were given on behalf of the king and the kingdom. Now you might be wondering, well, maybe the third servant wasn't a savvy business person. Maybe he needed more time and training. Perhaps even a degree in finance would have helped. See, this type of thinking that often infects our view of the kingdom, it comes directly from the line of thought that sees the self as the solution. But the third servant's choices had nothing to do with his investing qualifications. His poor performance connected to little else but his view of who the master was. A view, mind you, that seemed to be rooted mainly on public opinion of the master. This is much like those followers who measure their fidelity based on what everyone else is saying or doing. A mindset like that can never bear any fruit. Quite the opposite, actually. Look at what the master says after his exchange with the unfaithful servant. Verse 24. Then, turning to the others standing nearby, the king ordered, "Take the money from this servant and give it to the one who has 10 pounds. "But master," they said, "he already has 10 pounds. "Yes," the king replied, "and to those who use well what they are given, even more will be given. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away." Did you catch that? When our view of the master is compromised, we don't simply miss out on abundance. We actually become poorer for it. Wow. To close, I simply have two questions for you. How is God calling you to invest your gifts today? And how might your misguided views about the master be keeping you from taking every advantage to multiply those gifts for him? God bless you.